50% that you're going to get covered from this IRAP grant. The other 50% you can potentially also claim through the SR&ED program. So the idea is you're going to get 50% covered. The other 50% you can get a tax credit on. Why not, right? I mean, the idea is if these programs are available to you and the money is there, certainly, and there are instances and there are a lot of good success stories, I think companies shouldn't feel discouraged where they've successfully tapped into programs. And I find the companies that are really good at it, again, are the ones that are kind of using, I would say, one application as the basis for the next one.
With me today is Naren Balakrishnan. He's a partner at Doane Grant Thornton, specializing in helping businesses grow by securing funding, optimizing R&D, and driving innovation. And today we'll talk a lot more about that and some of the ways that you can help your business grow, and some of the options that you probably didn't know that exist out there for you if you're a small business or medium-sized business. So, Naren, first of all, tell me, what are non-diluted funding to scale and grow government programs?
Yeah, so we always, I always use the thinking that non-dilutive funding is an essential part of a strategy, a funding strategy for a company. So when a company, especially when a company first starts out, it can be challenging, right, to grow and scale. You have a lot of things that you'd like to do, but funding can sometimes be a barrier for that. So non-dilutive funding is really nice because it allows you to access. I don't ever want to use free money, government money and other sources, but it's free money with an asterisk. But the idea is it helps you in that growth. It gets you to kind of that next level before you say you're pre-revenue or you're going after that sort of VC angel. And it, again, the beauty of it is too, is you don't have to dilute, right? So you're not giving up anything in the company. And it allows you to access and scale. So I think companies that do it right, I find, are really in the system in terms of like they understand what's available. They kind of leverage one program or another. They stack these programs, they maximize. But the whole idea behind non-dilutive funding is any sort of funding that doesn't require you to sort of give up any sort of equity in your company. It can vary, so everything from government grants, tax credits, tax incentives, and we'll get into that into the conversation. But it's any sort of category of funding that falls outside of like any sort of equity stake in the company and allows you to kind of grow and achieve your goals. So.
Something you mentioned there very interesting. You said you can stack these programs. Can you walk me through an example of maybe someone that you worked with recently, or how does someone stack a couple of these non-diluting funding?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's say, for example, you have a company that's heavily invested in R&D, and so essentially they're going to embark on a project, and they're looking for some support, some sort of a grant funding to offset some of the, let's say, cost to hire an engineer. And as we know, in Canada and even in North America in general, hiring talent is expensive, right? So so the idea is if we can offset some of those costs, then it'll allow us to do a lot of these projects that we might not ordinarily be able to do. So stacking, what it allows you to do, so I'll use an example with a grant and a tax credit. So let's say there's a program called IRAP, which is an innovation program, and it's administered by NRC Canada. The idea is they come in and they'll say, okay, you have this project that we feel is very interesting from an innovation standpoint. We're going to subsidize the hiring of an engineer's salary. So it could be anywhere from 50 to 80%. So let's say in this example, it's a 50% coverage. So they're basically saying we're going to support 50% of this salary. The beauty of stacking is the other side of it. There's tax credit programs. So there's the big program in Canada is called SR&ED, so Scientific Research and Experimental Development. So I've got many clients, and so this is not just one example, but many clients take advantage of this. So that 50% that you're going to get covered from this IRAP grant. The other 50% you can potentially also claim through the SR&ED program. So the idea is you're going to get 50% covered. The other 50% you can get a tax credit on. So this is an example of stacking, right? So the idea is that I don't know, the exact math is a little tricky to work out right now, but essentially a lot of that, it could be up to 70% of that salary cost is covered through these programs. So just because you received a grant that offset some of the cost, you're not restricted from just using that grant. You can then say, okay, these other half that the company had to incur, we can recoup some of that further through the SR&ED tax credit. So the idea is that you're really maximizing and stacking these programs to really take advantage of non-dilutive funding.
It sounds like there are a lot of opportunities that a lot of people don't know they exist. Like you said, free money with an asterisk to help you
Mhm.
kind of in those early stages. What are the types? Because you kind of started the kind of hinting at it. There's
Yeah.
grant, which is a different thing. Tax credits is a different thing. Walk us through
Yeah.
what are the options? What are the classifications?
Yeah, those are the two main categories, I would say. So grants or direct funding, and then tax credits are more spend money and get money back, from a credit perspective. So I'll kind of walk through both. So in direct funding and grants is, as the name suggests, it's typically done before you embark on a project. So the idea is you have your roadmap. You want to undertake a project or series of projects in a year or a couple of years. You want to go out and see, is there any sort of any sort of direct funding or grants that can support that. So it's typically done in advance, and so it does require some planning. So some of the categories we see for direct funding would be examples. I mentioned hiring, training, innovation type grants, and then the other ones would be also like export type grants. So under Export Canada, for example, CanExport is quite a popular program. That grant, what it facilitates is if you have a product or service that you're developing that you want to take outside of Canada. So it's like, as the name suggests, export. There's a grant that would cover. This is a grant that would cover things like trade shows, trade missions. You're going out to do marketing or translation in other jurisdictions. There's grants for that. So there's those are kind of the high level categories that we see of grants. But underneath each of those categories, there's sort of subcategories. So you might have hiring, could be, interns. It could be hiring youth. It could be hiring experience. Under training, it could depend on the industry. Under the export, under innovation, like I said, IRAP is a big one. There's programs like FedDev. It really starts to branch out when you get into industry, academia, and geography. So the programs start to really balloon. So that's kind of the grant funding, direct funding landscape. On the other side, so I alluded to SR&ED earlier. SR&ED is by far the largest tax credit for tax or tax incentive that's given out by the government of Canada. That's for R&D. So any company that's doing any sort of R&D, regardless of the industry, should be looking at SR&ED because it can be a very substantial, I would say up to 60 cents on the dollar. Potentially you can recoup on R&D development. So it's typically the labor or salary cost. That is, again, not restricted to any industry. And it allows, companies to, again, reduce the burden of that R&D expenditure. The tax credit is different than the grant in that it's not upfront. So you incur the cost. And then each year, every company has a corporate tax filing requirement. You can put in a SR&ED application, which basically says, in this past year, I'll summarize it, but in this past year, we did this work. We feel it's eligible. Here's the expenditures we incurred, and then you're basically asking the government to apply and to get a credit for that money. Now, where the asterisk comes in with both sides of the programs is there can be administration, right? So the government has, on the grant side, they have a certain amount of money allocated each year, so they have to make sure that the companies that are asking for the money are truly eligible and fit the criteria. And some programs get very competitive. Some programs have intakes. Sometimes it's tied to, again, like I mentioned, geography or academia or industry. So there is restriction on that. On the SR&ED side, it's similar. So it's not so much a restriction on the amount they give out each year. I would say SR&ED gives out about $3.5 to $4 billion in tax credits each year. So it's a substantial number, but there are a lot of applicants. And as you can imagine, there are probably some applicants, companies that are coming in and not doing it correctly or trying to take advantage of the program or don't really fit the criteria. So the government has auditors on their side that are looking to make sure, again, the company is doing it properly. Are you meeting the requirements? Do you have the right documentation? So that's where the notion of not being free comes into play. So it is very important that you do things the right way. The only other thing I will say on the tax credit side, SR&ED is the big one. There are other tax credits. So, for example, if you're into game development, there are digital media tax credits that are available in a number of provinces. And then the most recent tax credits that were announced by the government, and this is a real push for clean energy, green, those type of projects. There was a series of clean tax credits that were announced very recently to help companies, again, offset the cost of equipment and capital that they're doing to make more, clean projects and green energy projects, clean manufacturing and things like that. So that's kind of the landscape when it comes to tax credits versus grants and in Canada. So
Awesome. Now, because there's a lot of moving parts to these things, um, how do people get access to these programs?
Yeah, it's a good point. So it depends on kind of a few things, a few factors, kind of the stage of your company, right? So one of the things that I often get questions on is like, okay, we're a startup, are we going to be able to get these grants right away? And the answer is maybe, right? It depends. Some grants, I would say, for example, like hiring grants, if you're especially if you're trying to get like students or interns or something like that, typically those grants are a little bit easier to access in the early stages. Whereas some programs, it is a little bit intuitive, but some of the programs they do want to see a little bit of traction before they will fund. There's not sort of a I would say like a seed grant fund. So as you kind of grow a little bit, IRAP can come into play, CanExport can come into play, like programs like FedDev. There's a big push for AI now, so we're starting to see some new AI type initiatives. So really, it's a matter of I would say keeping track of kind of what's available. The grant landscape changes quite a bit. So the idea is sometimes, for example, there was a women entrepreneur program that came out a few years ago. The intake was like a few weeks, and it wasn't a program that was around for very long. It was very popular. They got a lot of applicants come in, and so part of it is I think keeping track of kind of what's available and kind of monitoring it and kind of the stage you're at. So again, it might be early for you to take a certain grant, but a year from now, you might fit the criteria a little bit better. On the tax credit side, I would say as long as you're doing work that's eligible and you have those costs, you should be looking at the tax like the shred tax credit pretty early on. It is not restricted by you don't need to be revenue generating. You don't need to have, a taxable, owing tax and things like that. It's nice because it's a refundable cash credit. So the idea is you don't even, you're getting cash back essentially. You don't even have to be, a profitable company to take advantage of it. So that one, I think definitely once you have those R&D expenditures and activities is a program that you should start thinking about. But the simple answer is, I think, is kind of keeping an eye on. There is one good resource that I can potentially link for everyone later on. There's a business benefits finder. And this is a government of Canada, sort of like it's like a matchmaking. So the idea is querying system. You put in some information, and it basically generates a list of these programs. So it can be a really useful tool for companies, especially that are new to funding in Canada. Allows you to kind of put in some information. Here's my industry, number of employees, what kind of programs am I looking for, and it'll kind of spit out a list of these programs. And it's actually nice. It's pretty thorough. So it's not just doing like the grants and incentives and tax credits, but it's also doing things like groups like the BDC or accelerators and incubators at universities. It gives you a lot of different options. And the reason those are important too is for example, like you might be a part of an accelerator that's running like a pitch competition, and there might be money involved in that. So yeah, so you want to take a look at kind of the stage you're at and what's available to you, but keep monitoring those programs. So
Now, because there's so much monitoring to do and there's so many moving parts, people probably get discouraged. What are kind of some of the typical myths that you hear about grant applications?
yeah, I would say from a myth perspective, it's like, oh, like it's a lot of work without any benefit, you know what I mean, to doing this. Like, is it actually worthwhile for me to fill out a lot of this paperwork and do a lot of these programs? Like, I don't think I'm a real fit. Like, is the time investment really worth it at the end? And I say that would be a myth for sure, because I've had a lot of client success stories where they've successfully tapped into programs, and I find the companies that are really good at it, again, are the ones that are kind of using, I would say, one application as the basis for the next one, right? So they're just kind of leveraging. They're saying, okay, we got this grant, we can sort of replicate or use a lot of the information that we had in one application, and it has some similarities to another application, and that success kind of breeds success for another application, I find. So the companies that do it really well are really in tune. So that's one of the myths, is like, it's not really worth it. Maybe the amount that I'm going to get is not really worth it. But I do find, like, why not, right? I mean, the idea is, if these programs are available to you and the money is there, certainly, and there are instances and there are a lot of good success stories, I think companies shouldn't feel discouraged to go after them. Now, there is some truth to the fact that it's, like I've been saying, like, it's, you could have, these applications, and in the grants world, an example would be, you could have a really good application go in, but based on competition or based on intake based on the amount that's available, it's possible that you might be, denied based on just those factors. So sometimes it's a little bit out of your control, but I would say don't be discouraged. I think if you're doing something that really fits, and the government, what I've seen over the years, there has been an evolution for the government to try and incentivize more so in Canada over the years. There's a lot more that's available now than there were 20 years ago, for example. And so I think those are some of the myths around, like, yes, while there might be some work that's involved, that there is a payoff in the end. So
Interesting. Now, you are mentioning that there is a component of competition. There's a component of what you include in the applications, and one of the there's a lot of people that are applying, and they are trying to take advantage of these programs, but they're not doing it the right way. What happens if you are misrepresenting things?
I mean, two things. I guess one is obviously it could, prevent you from, getting the funding in general, right? Like there could be restrictions on, like, and it could be something that's, happening more than once, right? So it could really be impacting you, and it could also be discouraging you, quite frankly. Like there might be something that you don't have. The other side of it that is a concern is that if you're doing things the wrong way now, for example, in the SR&ED tax credit world, if you're really let's say falsifying information, there's like penalties and there's real issues. So that's something you should always steer clear of. And similarly in grants, you don't want to be misrepresenting information. Not only could it impact your current application, there's like a reputational risk for other programs and things like that. So definitely, like, there is something to be said for doing things the right way, and making sure you're following kind of the guidelines for that reason. So
I understand. So there is penalties, and there's the things like that
potentially,
in place to protect it. Now,
yeah.
you said there's a lot of changes and government changes, and there's a lot more available now than what it was before. What do you expect to see more grants or tax credits in 2026?
I think it's around the areas that I mentioned. So AI, I think, kind of goes without saying that we have a minister of AI now, and I think there's a real push for that. We're going to see how that sort of shakes out in terms of, I know IRAP has kind of tapped into some AI programs, but we're going to get some more clarity on, like, where they're going to distribute some of the funding around AI, which types of programs are going to get it, which types of industries are they going to support. So I think that's one. And then the other one is the clean area. So I think that's just a big push. When you think about carbon capture, you think about clean, green energy, clean manufacturing. There's a real push in Canada and globally when you think about, EV, and you think about just ways that we can be better from a just from a clean perspective. I think there's a real push there. So we already saw the clean credits come in. They got a little bit of an update actually in the most recent budget to allow more cost. And then the other thing I will say is the SR&ED program actually had some significant enhancements in the most recent budget. So that also plays into this. And one of the costs they brought back into the program is capital expenditures. So the idea is if you're investing a lot in capital, equipment, manufacturing, so they sort of heard from companies that there are a lot of investments in that. So I think that has also is an area of kind of focus kind of going into this year. So I think those are some of what we would expect in the coming year in terms of funding. So.
Fantastic. Now, Naren, if someone listens to this and they're like, wow, this is fantastic, I didn't know about all these things, how do people get a hold of you to work with you?
Yeah, I think I can share my contact information, whether it's email. LinkedIn is probably a very easy way to get a hold of me. I'm pretty active on there. So yeah, kind of combination of email. We've got, and we could share some of this with the listeners. But again, email. We've got a website as well as LinkedIn as a means to reach out. And I'm happy to also share that business benefits finder as a resource as well for anyone listening.
I appreciate the time, Naren. Thank you so much. This was very eye-opening. I think it gave, at least for me, it gave me that confidence that, you know what, there probably is something out there that I haven't even looked at or tried. These opportunities are there, and there's a lot of changes. So what you've seen from 25 is very different in 26, or even before that. Like, they are so fluid, like you're explaining these programs and grants and tax credits. So at least it gave me the inspiration to at least look at what is available and use some of the tools that you'll share with us. So I appreciate the time. Thank you for sharing all that information, and I wish you all the success.